Okay, here we go. Let's just show ourselves. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first GETT session of the 18-19 school year. GET refers to gifted education on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And today, my friend Erin Lofton will be here, and we'll be doing some co-presenting. I hope that you're off to a great start to this school year, and that by this time you have at least a working sense of what the gifted student data looks like for you and what the needs are of your gifted students. The purpose of GET is twofold. One is to highlight a current relevant topic or policy in gifted education for more information. The second is to increase our understanding and use of perhaps some special instructional strategies and practices in gifted education. Today, Erin and I will focus on information about the Unified Improvement Plan and gifted education criteria that is embedded in district UIPs and now on the electronic form. The indicators for gifted education have not changed. There's been no policy change, so I want to be sure people understand that up front. However, what we have done with the advice from a design team that was representative of people both in and outside of gifted education and representative of BOCES and districts is that we streamlined the content and that we, the process, so that we include gifted education progress reporting, the talent, the targets, and the action plan, all within the electronic form in a different way. And so we have shared this not only with the design team, but with some other little focus groups, including some rural folks in the state, and they have reported to us, have given us some feedback that they think the process is friendlier, and then it'll be a better display of gifted student performance information integrated with the district improvement efforts. So our aim is to weave the understanding and the transparency information about gifted student targets so that all constituents are aware and can kind of work together to promote positive academic gains for all students, including gifted student performance in their districts. I think from the vantage point of some of us, we know that there's an urgency in our gifted data to look at student performance in terms of asking questions. Are our gifted students performing at the exceed level, for instance, on state assessment where we might expect them to be? And are they growing to the point where we would expect them to? So we certainly want to be sensitive to that, but we also want to be sensitive to the district process and procedures for UIP development. So as we move forward, there we go, whoops.
Wow, cruising.
There we go. Can they see that?
Mm-hmm.
Is this hiding them?
Nope, you're set.
Okay. So we have a few norms I just want to cover quickly in regard to running the session. Please mute your computer speakers when not speaking. I have muted everyone, but if you turn yours on, please remember to turn it back off. Of course, listen and respect each other's opinions. Please feel free to contribute in a manner that will help us further the topic and the relevancy of our topic. Please contribute to group time if the phones are open or the floor is open for dialogue and discussion. And most importantly, please use the chat box for questions and comments, and we'll try to address as many as we can along the way. And if we can't address them today, Erin and I will get back with you and make sure your questions are answered within a short amount of time, all right? Looking at our participants, it looks like that we do have some folks that are staff people in gifted education, and also, quite nicely, we have a representation of folks that are either UIP planners for your district or outside the main primary role of gifted ed. So we really welcome that, and we welcome your perspective. Okay. It's not moving.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Today, we've framed this session in 3 parts. And so our outcomes from today kind of match the 3 different parts. We're going to start briefly by describing, going over the process for unified improvement planning. And then we will frame the gifted education program expectations for the UIP. And lastly, we will just briefly mention or highlight or bring to the table what we're calling contextual factors that might interface or support the UIP planning process. So in terms of outcomes, we would hope that you would become familiar with this, that you would know the expectations, and that afterwards you would talk about your own contextual framework or factors that might influence the logistics of your planning process.
So one, I might say non-purpose for today is to be really clear, this is not going to be a UIP 101. So yes, we will go over some of the fundamentals. If that is something that you are needing, please let us know and we can reach out so that you get that support. But I just want to clarify right off the bat that this is not going to be a 101 level webinar.
Correct. Okay. All right. So, ready to move forward?
Onward.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, so the first thing that I think is really important to understand in terms of improvement planning across the state of Colorado is that there are multiple purposes that improvement planning serves. And so depending on sort of your context, where you are, or in some cases, experiences of yourself or other staff, some of these purposes may feel more heavy in one way than another. So I just want to really quickly acknowledge that the first purpose of improvement planning is around accountability. And the department made a policy decision in response to districts saying, CDE, stop making us turn in all these different plans that send our districts in different directions. The gifted education improvement expectations fall in line with this accountability alignment expectation. So what we are trying to do is to reduce the improvement plan submission burden to districts by incorporating it into existing work. And again, ideally aligning that work in a way that makes sense in a local context. I do want to real quickly acknowledge these other purposes. Some is a formal documentation purpose. So for schools or districts that have a priority improvement or turnaround plan type or are identified under ESSA, there is a specific function that the plan serves in terms of documenting what is happening, the resources that are allocated, the decision-making and the stakeholders involved in that process. So I just want to acknowledge that. I would say this transparency element, while yes, we also have families and communities involved, we also want to think about our staff because they're the ones, quite frankly, where a lot of the burden falls in terms of those change efforts and those improvement efforts. We also acknowledge the best practice elements and really want to try and tap into those whenever possible. We have, again, systems that are really high performing and they want to push the edge of how do we maximize the continuous improvement work in a way that's really going to get us the best outcomes for our students. And then the last is around support. And this happens not only at CDE for some of our low performing systems, but I would also say in terms of districts and work that is prioritized for schools so that districts can provide that work. If you want to talk about any of those opportunities, glad to have that conversation as well. Okay. The next element that is pretty fundamental to the improvement planning process is understanding these different components. Now, these elements are outlined in a variety of different improvement planning expectations, either through best practice or statute. So that is part of why they exist here. I am going to speak to these at an extremely high level. The first element is acknowledging the data analysis. So this is, again, capturing what is in terms of your performance data over time. We are going to look at performance data for our current performance, our trends and our performance challenges, and then really look to adults and systems as a part of our root cause analysis. Then we're going to get into action planning for target setting and the work of adults and systems through that action plan. And then based on this information, again, because we don't want the plan to be just a once a year box checking activity, we are going to engage in progress monitoring and say, how are things going and where do we need to make adjustments? Now, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the online system or engaging it for the first time, again, I would say helpful hint, it is this underlying structure that guides the UIP online system. So if you can have a mental map of this, I think this may help you in the actual filling out of your online system. So we'll come back to this as necessary. But again, this is what drives the underlying system of the online UIP.
Do you want to say anything about that?
Not yet. Okay. Not yet. We'll get there. There's lots. So I think one of the other elements that in the process is acknowledging that it is in fact a process. It's really what happens with your staff, with your team, with your stakeholders. But what we want to make sure is that we also understand that whatever comes of that process is what gets documented in the plan. So kind of having this understanding of what is process versus what is product. And so, again, I know particularly for some of the gifted ed directors who don't always have direct access to this online system, I just wanted to give you a little visual. This is what the online system looks like. You can see across the top the different sections of the UIP. There's some information, again, that is pre-populated. There's the data narrative that outlines the subsequent sections, and then similarly, for section 4, we'll have those elements of the action plan. So the action planning, the targets, etc. So again, just kind of want to acknowledge that differentiation between process and product. All right, we're navigating some technology fun here. Oh, here we go. Perfect. Okay. The other piece that we want to acknowledge is that while our accountability system does use assessment data and other performance data, when it comes to improvement planning, we do want to use a variety of data sources to guide our work. So we leverage the framework from Victoria Bernhardt around data types. So the other piece that we're going to be a little particular about is what data gets used when. So acknowledging the first two columns, the performance data and the demographic data, is what gets captured in your trends, your priority performance challenges, your targets, and interim measures. So this is sort of the data that tells us students are making progress against those areas that we're concerned about: achievement, growth, post-secondary workforce readiness. We want to make sure that students are moving that direction. However, especially in a school context, one of my favorite quotes is culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you may have the most well-intentioned, well-designed, evidence-based intervention, but if the culture and climate of that space is toxic, that intervention stands very little chance of being effective. So when we talk about school improvement, we want to be a little bit disciplined about how we look at that data. So we're going to look at process and perception data, and we're going to be specific about where that gets placed in and used within the improvement planning process, as well as the product of the UIP. So the process and perception data intersected with demographic data we're going to use in our root causes, major improvement strategies, action steps, and implementation benchmarks. The next piece that we want to share with you in terms of fundamentals is the quality criteria. Even yesterday, I was having a conversation with some district folks, and surprised, not surprised, to find, actually, again, it was a small group, but folks in the room were not aware that the quality criteria exists. So I just want to be really clear about what the quality criteria is. It is basically an articulation of what the expectations are for a UIP. Okay, so when we're looking at plans, when we're reviewing plans, when the gifted education program is reviewing plans, we want to be really clear about what the expectation is. We don't want it to be a gotcha. We don't want it to be a surprise. So we articulate it here through, we have both criterion-based as well as a rubric. And we really are looking to get to that meets expectation level. So again, just want you to be aware that this document is available. It is out there. And we would really like you to use it. We want it to be a resource for you as you are in the process of developing the plans, or again, leading your teams through processes that you know what you're trying to get to. All right.
Okay. We're going to move on now and talk about the gifted education criteria that are embedded in accountability. So I do want to make reference to the Exceptional Children's Education Act. And the Act requires us to have procedures for accountability that align with our state accountability and accreditation process. And so for those of us in Colorado, which we all are, this means that we need to blend our accountability basically with our UIP process. The regulations then also clarify that this is, and it specifically calls out the UIP plan as that format, as that method of being responsible for the provisions to monitor and measure gifted student performance. And we know that those plans are either annual or biannual as far as submission to CDE. So the message that we send is that the UIP district plan is the annual plan for gifted education, and it also weaves both state and federal accountability into one plan rather than having many plans that we had prior to having UIP integrated plan, okay? What you will see as we move forward into this coming year is that the standalone addendum is being eliminated. I would say that was an iteration of learning how we can best deliver this monitoring and responsibility and obligation that we had. And so as we got into the UIP plan, the addendum made sense at that time. And we actually had other programs that had addendums at that time. And so now we see that the UIP is completely electronic, everything's embedded, and now the next iteration will see that the elements for gifted education will also be embedded into the electronic form, okay? The other thing I can highlight at this point in regard to ECA and implementation of that particular provision is that it is called out that we need to have particular areas of responsibility in the UIP. And you have them summarized or described here on this slide. There are 4, I call them the big buckets, that need to be addressed for the provisions of accountability for gifted students in the UIP. Prior to this visual, we used the addendum template. That was our descriptors to show people what needed to be on that addendum. And if you remember, there was choice. People could either submit the addendum as a standalone. People could say, here's some on the addendum, here's some embedded, and into our district UIP, and other AUs chose to embed everything in their district addendums, UIP. So already we saw the transition over the last 2 years of people moving more into embedding gifted student performance criteria into their UIP. So we're actually going that way. We can support those efforts. Progress report is about prior year's targets and comments about trends. We have data analysis to get to the performance challenge. We create an action plan, identifying what the improvement strategy would be, and then the performance target. Okay. So to make a connection here, Erin, when she was describing general quality criteria, you will see that gifted education also has quality criteria. If you've been on this journey for a while, former UIP documents had a little icon. It was a little oval. I think it was yellow.
So
and
yeah, sort of a peachy color.
Yeah, and it had gifted GED on it, and that meant that those were the criteria for gifted ed. And so when you look at progress report, when you're thinking about it, when we're reviewing it, the criteria is that it does speak to what are you seeing as a comparison to last year's target or 2 years ago target to what's happening now, and then comment on the trend of that. As far as the method, we would want to know some reference to your data analysis. No more though, on our former template, people charted out every single little step they did in data analysis and things of that nature. You don't need to do that anymore. You would make comment about this just like you do making comments about your students in general on your district UIP, okay? But you will identify your performance challenge. The other criteria is around action plan. And so we would look for gifted education elements in the action plan, and then of course the target. All right. And our targets tend to be around achievement at the exceed level or growth in regard to our excellence gaps. Okay. As we get into we're not changing process. In fact, we're embedded to a different degree now. We start with the first step is the progress report, reviewing the current performance. And later when we show you the actual screenshots, you'll see where the button is or how you get into the gifted part. Some of the questions you would ask for progress report are, how did they perform compared to the identified targets for performance in the previous plan? And then you may want to then elaborate even more extensively on the notable trends that you saw.
Okay. Statement here. So for some of you, again, where this is a new a sort of new way of incorporating the information, you have the option to also add prior year target. So if it was not previously included and carried forward from your UIP, you can add a previous year target and respond to that within the online system. I know that is probably going to be an element for many of you, but know that option does exist.
And then what about next year's?
So next year, what will happen is, as we sort of go along, and you identify targets for subsequent years, those will carry forward and be pre-populated in your prior year's targets. So for the first time that you're really explicitly identifying gifted education prior year targets, if you had done an addendum previously or it hadn't been explicit, you have the option to add it. But then moving forward, it will carry forward.
Yeah, that's a nice feature of this online service. Yeah.
Yes.
So next we get into method, data analysis, and this data analysis will result in your performance challenge. And performance challenge will help us in to set our target as we move along. The performance challenge itself, we know that it will represent most likely the trends that you're seeing, not just in gifted education, but also most likely trends that you might be seeing in your district at large. And we say that because gifted education is not an education in isolation. It is influenced by resources, by time, by curriculum, and all the things that are going on in your district at large. The performance challenge will then become a focus of your root cause analysis that naturally flows out of the performance challenge, because you will be asking, why do we think this is happening? And then that becomes a focus for your action planning when you get to that step. You'll be identifying a performance challenge that will be of greatest magnitude for your gifted students. Typically, again, those come about when you see disparities in achievement data, either at school levels, or for us in gifted education, often our gaps are seen when we look at our gifted students in poverty, or our gifted students from minorities, and when we compare their data to the gifted population at large, we will see some disparities. So often we see challenges in those kinds of areas. Two important concepts when we're looking at performance challenge. Convergent and divergent are very important because it will influence the next steps in your UIP development. So as you're defining your performance challenge for gifted students, you need to ask yourself, do these performance needs of gifted students converge with the needs of the students in the district overall? It could be that gifted students have the very same challenges in the very same content area as the district. And so we say that is convergent. At other times, you will see that the students in gifted education have a divergent, or they diverge from the performance needs of the other students in the district. So one example might be everyone in the district across all schools, all groups, English language learners, free and reduced lunch folks are gifted, that there is a need in literacy achievement. And that there has been at least, this example is 15 points below state average, and the growth has been low and flat. So we would say that this performance challenge for gifted education converges with the district needs, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, but what you can see here, I think one of the critical elements for districts that might be choosing this route is that gifted students, the performance need of gifted students as well as those other groups is explicitly called out. So it allows us to really know, oh, the data has been examined and we know that this is the circumstance. This is in fact the case. Okay, right. So it's the explicit nature in which the way the performance challenge is written, that we know that gifted education is included as a part of the needs of the district overall.
Thank you. And that'll be on another slide too. So it's not on this slide, but when you see the other one, it'll jog your memory that, oh yes, we have to explicitly state that it's convergent with gifted ed. And then we might be in a situation where the performance need of gifted students is distinctly different from the other student groups. Okay, so the pattern of performance shows us that we need to address it differently. And this is an example of perhaps the blue arrows show that the majority of students in the district may have a literacy need, and maybe it's at the school level of K-3. However, the gifted students with the orange line, maybe theirs is a math middle school need, or free and reduced lunch kids in reading at the elementary level. So that's divergent.
Here's a sample for a district that again has needs overall. You can see very clearly in 1 and 2, but they've identified that the needs for gifted students is not where they think, again, that expectation should be. So they've called it out explicitly as its own priority performance challenge.
And so you're feeling pretty confident about your performance challenge. You know if it converges or diverges. And that's going to quite naturally lead you into asking, well, why is this happening? You know, whether it's divergent or convergent. And this then, of course, sets us up for action planning. And this action plan, like I said before, is specifically called out in the implementation of ECEA. Okay, so again, the action steps when they're convergent will respond to the gifted needs of students, but again, they need to be explicitly called out. And this is some feedback we've actually given to some districts in the past, because they say they've embedded gifted ed and they talk about all the great things that are going to happen in the action plan, but they forgot to mention, oh yeah, gifted students are in there too. And so we just need to see that clearly, that the gifted students' needs are being met through that common district improvement plan.
And so some of that might include, you know, things that are, how are we thinking about maybe some of the specific professional development that might be needed around differentiation, extension. I would say also around perhaps the role of coaching that might be provided, you know, overall. But if there are some things that are being explicitly expected for gifted education students, what's the coaching that's going to happen for them? Who's responsible for that? Is that going to fall to the principal, or is that maybe going to fall to a district level gifted education specialist, right? So just acknowledging where those needs are different. All right, on we go. Target setting. This hopefully is the most straightforward.
Well, yeah.
Again, I didn't say it was easy. It is hopefully the most straightforward. So again, we want to ensure that targets are set in alignment with those prioritized performance challenge. So they do need to be explicitly set, whether it's part of a convergent priority performance challenge or divergent. You want to make sure that the performance expectations are clearly articulated. And I think the other big thing is making sure what is the interim measure that you're going to be looking at to know that that's happening. And as we described earlier, once these targets are set, they will carry forward on your next UIP so that you can report on their progress.
One point about targets that's different from the big district UIP overall is that we're asked, there needs to be at least one target, an action plan, where district might have several different targets addressing different disparities. But to meet the requirements for gifted ed, there needs to be a minimum of the 1, okay? That's always nice to clarify. You don't have to address every single disparity.
Absolutely not.
No.
Oh, the fun stuff.
Yeah, it is.
So there are, we classified these as contextual factors. So these are things that really impact the logistics of planning. So some of this really, again, gets more at the practices, not just the product of the plan itself. The structuring of the administrative unit. So again, what does that infrastructure look like? Potential implications for accreditation level, and then levels of analysis. So again, we just want to acknowledge that these are all factors that folks are wrestling with and that we have attempted to accommodate within the system, the resources, the guidance that we're putting out around all of these things.
Right, and so the first word on this slide, well, the first line in the bullets is about partnership. So I guess what we'd like to say is that what we are trying to do is what we'd like to do is encourage that the staff in gifted education and the staff, whoever works on the UIP in that district, are in the know of who's doing what and what the timeline is and who can contribute. And this embedding into the UIP isn't meant to say that you are required to change your process. We are encouraging, though, high partnership with your staff in gifted education for information. In some districts, the gifted staff might be on the UIP team, might be at the table when you're collecting data and data analysis and all that. And others, it might be that you're just requesting certain pieces of information from your gifted education staff. There's no right or wrong. We just are encouraging that there is a partnership that's cultivated and that people know who's doing what and what information is needed when. Okay. The other thing that we think this will do, we hope it will do, one of the side effects is that people that are involved actually have to do the implementation piece of the action plan for gifted students are in the know. We've heard that sometimes with the addendum, it gets lost because if people are going to refer to the UIP plan, they tend to go to the main body and may not look at that addendum. I'm not saying that's true across the board, but that's just some feedback as we were working through with the design team. So along with that in the partnership, again, this just supports asking who is at the table and what's going to be the most effective and efficient way that we can do this in our district. Okay. Now, we want to be respectful again of the district structure of the administrative unit, because in gifted, under ECEA, both special ed and gifted education typically operate with the administrative unit. However, as we know, UIP is a requirement of districts and schools. So we will address that, we hope, in a new visual that we've created to help clarify the choices that folks have when moving along in this process. I'm going to show that to you now. There are options for meeting the gifted education elements. If you are a single district AU, okay, then yes, we are encouraging knowing what the partnership is, how is communication about data analysis and targets and all that being shared. You would follow the process set up in your district, and you would go ahead and enter into the UIP template the 4 main areas that are being addressed in the district plan for completing the responsibilities, okay? So in a single district AU, what did you say? It's not simple? We're not saying it's simple?
No, it's definitely not. It's not simple, but aligned.
But aligned, yes. We're not saying anything simple. Now, on the right side of the visual, we have clarified, I guess, the choices that are available for multi-district AUs, including, of course, our BOCES. There are options on how this is done. And the first part of that visual, each district submits their own plan. They engage in the UIP process as they do every year or as they evolve. And so in a sense, it's like being a single district AU. They are in complete, the gifted education piece is in complete alignment with process and product of the district. Now, the other choices, there's an option 2 and 3 that exist for multi-district AUs and BOCES. The second option we call a coordinated gifted plan. This is when representatives, typically the directors and coordinators or other UIP people from their member districts, come together. They do their data analysis, they find commonality in their data analysis, and they basically write up the 4 elements for UIP inclusion. That would be the data analysis, they write their performance challenge, they do their major improvement and action plan, major improvement strategy and action plan, and then set their targets. Then each of those representatives takes that information that they've created and basically copy and paste it into their district's UIP. Their action plan typically will have shared professional development. They might do some observations. They might share the same tool that they're using to measure student performance. Okay. So that's called coordinated. And the following year, they'd come together and say, what's our progress report on that? And they continue in that manner. The third option for multi-district AUs and BOCES is when they do basically a combination of 1 and 2, option 1 and 2. That means I am a BOCES of, say, 12 member districts. I have 8 that want to use option 1. We're going to do the UIP on our own. Then I have 4 that say, you know, we'd really like to get together and do a coordinated plan, do our data analysis, come up with our common performance challenge, and then support each other in our action plan. That's called the combination. Again, when that is created, they would cut and paste those elements into their district's UIP. We're not changing any submission requirements, meaning the BOCES does not submit the UIP, right? So that's the new visual. These are not new choices. We've always had them, but it was confusing to people, and now this really
hopefully putting things into pictures helps. Kind of, yeah, where, you know, where are you here map? You know, which one of these pathways are you selecting? I think one of the other things that we absolutely want to acknowledge is that based on the accreditation level of the district, there may be some different factors. So for those that are on priority or improvement or turnaround, there is a January submission to CDE for review of that plan. I would say for some of our smaller folks as well, acknowledging that if you're doing a combined plan, if it includes a school that's on priority improvement or turnaround, that can have impacts as well. A review will be conducted and feedback will be given on all that criteria, including gifted education. And then there are additional requirements that need to be met under state law. So there are some other components. We can talk about that at part of an accountability information session. But just acknowledging that there are these additional elements of scrutiny for districts navigating priority improvement or turnaround. For those that are on improvement or performance, we really are looking at an April submission that is focused more towards public posting. As Jacqueline referenced, there is biennial flexibility for that performance. And the feedback based on the review is going to be more oriented toward the gifted education program. It's not going to be a holistic review of all expectations of the UIP. So there are some definite distinctions in terms of what that review process and implications of accreditation levels have for, again, the product. And again, for those of you that are navigating some of the process elements, there are going to be, again, those different purposes that might be felt a little bit more heavily.
Right. And so I'd like, because I see that our attendance here is both gifted staff and general ed staff, the feedback by gifted education, actually gifted education regional consultants, is not evaluative in nature. There's a little protocol that can be used for conversation, for dialogue, either individually or it's discussed in a small group, large group, in the network meetings. And the purpose for that is twofold. One, it's pretty basic. Our law says we have to provide feedback of some sort or have some kind of discussion about it. But also then people within a region can support each other in their improvement efforts. And sometimes at the regional level, there can be school team kind of professional development that will support improvement efforts in the region. So that's the kind of feedback. It's not evaluative in nature. But I should say something about that. Now, this is a biggie. There might be some small school representation here. Go ahead. And it's certainly not an issue just for gifted education. And I think that's what Erin can verify here.
So I think big things, especially given the emphasis on gifted identified students through this planning work and an emphasis on their performance, what we're dealing with is that a lot of times these counts are really small. So we want to be aware that there is student level, potentially personally identifiable information. We want to be cautious about how we talk about that. That specific number is guided by district policy guidelines about what is actually considered personally identifiable information. And again, this is not unique to gifted, but gifted programs tend to run into this relatively frequently. So I just put a few quick options for analysis. As you're thinking about what gets presented in that planning product, so how things actually get written up in the plan, and what you might think about in terms of the process to get some sense of where the needs might be. So the first is thinking about aggregations across groups. So this might be across grade levels, across even school levels. So elementary, middle, high school. You may look at things across multiple years. Definitely consider looking at high-level description of patterns rather than specific numbers. So rather than saying, 20%, which is 1 of 5 kids, you could say less than a quarter, more than a half. Again, speaking more in sort of those aggregations or sort of pattern descriptions. And then also potentially looking at grouping based on performance levels. So how many are at or above the state average, or below level 3 performance on CMAS ELA. So thinking about sort of those comparison points or reference points, and how are things falling in terms of above and below. So again, those are just some sort of quick suggestions. If anybody is struggling with this, please reach out to me individually and we can work through. We do have some additional guidance specific to small systems about how to do some of this work. So please do not put too much effort into struggling on your own when we've got some nice things lined up. So again, we want to try and make it as easy as possible.
Nice offer. Okay, so let's review what we've talked about. Show up in the UIP. When you go into the actual document, the first thing that you will do is select whether your performance challenge is convergent or divergent, because then that will set up the template for the remainder of the information that you are putting into the UIP. The next step is to talk about your prior year's targets. You will define your your performance challenge, which leads into your action planning and target setting. Now, this is a screenshot of the actual electronic form. And so here you see at the very beginning, section 2, is that you will either mark whether gifted education is convergent or divergent. That is now on the form.
Okay, so this is, again, referring to when we're talking about the prior year's targets, so that progress reporting. Please note, actually, you can see that button there at the bottom. It says add prior year targets. So if you find yourself in a situation where you do not have targets carrying forward that were explicit to gifted education, you can add that information here. But then once you actually engage in this process through the online system, from here on out, they will carry forward. And then again, this is just a screenshot of what the directions will look like in the online system. So you can see.
Are there going to be boxed red like that? Or do
no,
we just do
no,
it?
Sorry. We just called out the box red for
the screenshots.
For the screenshot so that you can see it. Okay.
And then as you can see, gifted education directions are embedded on the major improvement strategies for action planning. So the big thing, and then again here with the target setting, gifted directions. So you will see on the form gifted directions in our 4 areas of requirements.
Okay. Okay. And I think at this point, again, I know the mic situation is a bit difficult for folks. Please feel free to use the chat box to post any questions, clarifiers. Actually would appreciate a bit of feedback. So if there were things that were particularly helpful or that you would have liked to have known more about, please let us know. And we can keep working on this integration.
There's a new message.
Okay.
Oh, the quality crowd. Well, guess what?
I took care of that one.
Okay.
So the question, Karen, about ELA and mathematics, this is where, and Jacqueline, you can tell me what you think, but I think it's this idea that the idea of a prioritized performance challenge is that a decision has been made about where as a district are you choosing to focus. So these are, I mean, from a improvement planning side, we know that focusing on 22 different things in your UIP is not going to lead to focused improvement and change. At your district level, you will need to make choices. And actually, this would be a great place to have a partnership conversation with your other planning leaders about how are we making this decision and where are we going to focus. In terms of box, do you check? I'd say go ahead and hit divergent if you've already made that decision. Again, fundamentally, the only thing that convergent or divergent really does is modify the directions. Ultimately, within your plan, you still have free range to write however you would like to.
Correct.
Is that?
Yes, and the other thing is this does not exclude you from having more than one goal or target, as we're calling it. We're just saying minimally you have to have one. So Karen, it could be that you wanted to address the divergency of gifted student needs in ELA, but then converge a target for gifted students when you're talking about your mathematics target for the district. And then you would make mention of gifted students as you're doing your narrative within the action plan in mathematics. Let's see if there's another question here.
Okay. So question about the quality criteria document. If you look in the chat a little bit higher, I did put the school level, and you'll see a note about the district level. We are in the process of finalizing that right now, which is why you will also perhaps have noted the draft language on the webinar slide, because we are finalizing that right now. It is available always on the UIP website, but I think that's something that we can also make available on the Gifted Education website, again, so that you guys have direct access to that as well. So Diane, also to your question about how and when will this be sent out to other districts. So some of this we're doing as a part of updates, but I think that might be a more strategic conversation. And we can definitely strategize about that. I think to the degree that we've been able to incorporate it as a part of ongoing trainings or other work, we are doing so. But yeah, this is the start of rollout for sure.
Okay.
Let's see what else.
Miranda is asking about the data visualizations like you have received the last 2 years. I know that the data people here are working right now on special education, and we are coming up right behind them. So even though you have the data in the districts, we are just now getting data to do visualizations. And we have support here to do the gifted education work. My prediction is it'll come out sooner than last year because it was very late. But it's never as soon as the actual data that you have in your districts.
Okay, I have another web link here.
Okay, the priority improvement, we can put that, right.
So here's link for results.
Erin, Diane, Erin is gonna put in the chat box the link for the
preliminary.
Preliminary list of the priority improvement districts. So that should be helpful so everyone knows who those are. Lynette has a recommendation for larger print on the diagrams. I apologize. I probably should have bumped up the slides.
Well, and we also can have the actual diagram available as its own document. So again, I mean, what does that end up being, like a 0.3 font or something on the PowerPoint? We'll have the actual flow chart for you. Yes.
Flow chart, and all of your regional consultants have that chart. Let's see what else here. It says, when will this be shared beyond well, anybody can come. This be shared with districts beyond gifted coordinators, bring it back. So Diane, are you asking when will all this information be shared?
Yes, I was at Peppersack yesterday and our assistant soups, this was new information to them.
Oh yeah.
Well, I don't think they have all the guidance out yet for this year.
We're still working on ESSA identifications, Diane. There's a lot that is coming at district leaders right now. I think the degree to which we are able to get to them, we are working. But again, if you have suggestions about presentations or avenues, that would be fantastic.
And so as this does go into effect this year, you're wanting people to do it this year for UIP, is that correct, Erin?
Yes. Yes. This is on the form. It is on the form.
It's in the online system. The quality criteria is coming out. we have a couple of regional sessions that are happening in the coming days where we'll probably hit it at a super high level. But yeah,
And this particular webinar has been recorded, so people can have access to this. And then again, in trainings, we'll emphasize it. Erin has posted the URL, Diane, so you might be able to copy that.
okay.
Thank you.
I think, was that all the questions? I think that was it.
Okay. I think that's it. So thank you all so very much for joining us today. Like I said, this was the first GETT session of this year, and there will be more to come. So we hope to see you at the next GETT session. Take care, and please know that you can call Erin's office or my office at any time, and we'll try to get you the assistance you need as quickly as we can. Have a great day, and again, thank you.
Great, thank you.
See you later.